timeless voices of the eternal church.
John Wycliffe, England, December 31st, 1384. John Wycliffe was one of Oxford University's last great medieval scholars, and because of the clarity and popularity of his writings, he has been called the father of English prose, doing much to shape our language today. In addition to being a priest and theologian, he was an English statesman, once representing King Edward III on the continent in negotiations with the legate of the Pope. But he is also called the Morning Star of Reformation because nearly 200 years before the Reformation, he challenged papal authority and criticized the sale of indulgences and published a series of strong attacks on corruption in the church, where the clergy were often immoral and illiterate, and high offices were often bought and given out as political rewards. He also questioned the biblical basis for the doctrines of purgatory and transubstantiation, the belief that after consecration, the bread and wine turn into actual body and blood of Christ during communion. In spite of the fact that Wycliffe declared himself a loyal Catholic, willing to submit his opinions to the judgment of the Church, this was the time of the Great Schism, with 2 and ultimately 3 claimants to the papacy. Authority was uncertain to say the least, and Wycliffe's position were too threatening. Finally, church authorities banished him from Oxford University. But his release from his teaching responsibilities at Oxford enabled Wycliffe to undertake his most lasting contribution, translating, along with some associates, the Bible into English by 1382. He then organized the Religious Order of the Lollards, itinerant lay preachers who traveled throughout the countryside, reading the scriptures in English and preaching to the common people. For most, it was their first hearing the scriptures. For Wycliffe, getting the direct message of God's word into the language and hearts of the people held highest priority. He knew God's word would give men new life, and it did. People thrilled at being able to hear scriptures in their own tongue and loved Wycliffe for it. Probably they also appreciated how he had challenged church corruption at a time when the common people often felt that the church had accumulated too much wealth. Wycliffe's popularity with the people, however, was not enough to restore ecclesiastical goodwill. In 1382, the church banned all of his writings, but his enemies did not physically harm him. Finally, on New Year's Eve, 1384, Wycliffe suffered a fatal stroke. Wycliffe's influence was sufficient that 44 years after his death, his enemies succeeded in having him declared a heretic. His body was dug up from consecrated ground and burned, and its ashes were thrown into the swift river. But not before John Huss in Bohemia had read Wycliffe's work and was moved to raise some of the same questions to go to the scriptures for the answers. In turn, John Huss's writing profoundly influenced Martin Luther, known as the father of German Reformation. In 1942, a Coptical Indian challenged missionary Cameron Townsend with this question: "If your God is so great, why doesn't he speak my language?" Townsend recalled how important it had been for John Wycliffe to translate God's word into English over 5 centuries earlier. And he, the founded Wycliffe Bible Translators, which has since translated the Bible into 400 languages. Voice of the hero. God's words will give men new life more than the other words that are for pleasure. O marvelous power of the divine seed, which overpowers strong men in arms, softens hard hearts, and renews and changes into divine men, those men who had been brutalized by sins and departed infinitely by God. John Wycliffe. It is the same with my word. I send it out, and it always produces fruit. It will accomplish all I want it to, and it will prosper everywhere I send it. Isaiah 55 verse 11.
Reading from the complete book of Christian heroes, over 200 stories of courageous people who suffered for Jesus, compiled by Dave and Nita Jackson. This is the Eternal Church of Jesus Christ, the record.